So I think we'll start by reading their bios. So Kristian-Marc James Paul, who goes by he, him, his, is an activist and writer. He is a member of climate justice collective SG Climate Rally. Apart from his work in climate activism, Kristian also facilitates intergroup dialogues, partnering with organizations like AWARE to run community discussions on masculinity and male allyship. He was also a contributing author for White, Behind Mental Health Stigma, 2020, an anthology on mental health in Singapore.
And Mysara is a Singaporean creative, writer and researcher. With a background in communications and journalism, she was previously a journalist and documentary producer, and is currently pursuing her master's with the Malay Studies Department in NUS. Her current research looks at the formation of identity through state narratives of nation building that cuts across race, class, and gender. Her works, based on personal experiences and research, explore and reimagine dominant narratives through different mediums. Working on the intersections of art and academia, she also explores the politics of space and power structures in the process of narrative making. So I think before we even start, right, perhaps both of you could share about how you identify in terms of race in Singapore, right? Because, I mean, the brown community is a huge community in Singapore, and we can't say that these two co-editors can speak for every single brown person in Singapore. So I think it'd be good to have you guys just introduce yourselves a bit to begin.
Yeah. So what's my race is, I guess, the question. But no, I mean, I think that is the crux of what I try and explore, at least in my parts in the Brown is Haram script. I think it's interesting. So my race on my IC is Indian. My dad is Indian. But my mom is like Malay. And she's got a bit of like Eurasian blood also. And I think that has been something that I have negotiated my whole life, because even though I am still close to my dad, but my parents got divorced when I was fairly young, and so my mom and my grandma, so my maternal grandma, raised me, and so I resonate a lot with like that side of my family, and so I guess I would sort of say that I am like more Malay than I am like Indian, but then that's also like interesting because I've had experiences where I maybe am not necessarily like Malay enough for specific communities. In national service, I was in civil defense, which is there are a lot primarily Malay Muslim individuals, and I think experience sort of also then being like a bit like, I'm not like really like sort of that. I don't really fit in there also. So that is my answer to a seemingly short question, but I don't think there is a very like easy answer.
I guess if you want to look through the eyes of the state, in my identity card it actually says others. So my dad is Arab, his father is Arab, his mom is Chinese, but his family is very much Malay, like we've assimilated into the Malay community. We speak Malay, we don't speak Arabic, which is funny because on the birth certificate, sometimes they'll have your dialect or your father's dialect and it says Arabic, and my dad doesn't speak a word of Arabic. My mom is Malay, right? So I think like a lot of like mixed kids, you tend to kind of like maybe identify with one race, and because my mom is a stay-at-home mom and I spend a lot of time with my mom when my dad works, I see myself as a Malay woman. I don't see myself as Arab because I don't know anything about the culture. I grew up with a Malay culture. I speak Malay. I don't speak Arabic, so I identify myself as a Malay woman.
I think another question that maybe audiences would have, the average Singaporean, is how we define brown in Brown is Rejected, because this is a term that I don't think many Singaporeans are familiar with since we grew up with CMIO, and even for like westernized Singaporean youths, right, they just think in terms of black or white. So what does brown mean in the Singaporean context?
I think I don't know, I think at least for me, as much as like the book is about brownness, for me it's also, I think, almost not, productive or fruitful to kind of try and find an answer to what exactly is brownness, which is also why I think we wanted to do the anthology in the first place, because I guess Brown is Haram, the script, was very much about our experiences, very particular experiences with our race, but then we also realized that so many other people have other experiences with their race in I think something that you alluded to, like in a Chinese majority country. So I guess if you really want to like sort of like really kind of nail it down, I think it is definitely sort of I guess kind of like the non-Chinese, non-white experience. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a comprehensive answer to brownness, and I hope I think one of our aims was to ensure that the search for brownness is more important than the answer to what brownness is. I think
it's also looking at what the status quo is, right, and who upholds the status quo. Because I think one of the things that we look at also is critiquing, this idea of like, the model minority, right? I think in the play I also explore this idea of like your model Malay woman, who essentially is accepted by the state. So, essentially I think, we talk about brownness, it's like who does not have that power to decide what is the status quo or not.
Yeah, I think if anything it is about brownness is defined more by the people in power than us. Right, we are made to feel othered, or we are made to feel our race because we are alienated by I guess Chinese people. When people speak Mandarin in the workplace or whatever and we don't understand a word, that is how they define brownness. So if anything, actually it's not really us defining it. It's like everyone else who sort of defines it for us through the alienation.
So I think that's different, like, ethnicities or, talk about social class and brownness, but there's always that, like, small little thing that bind us, right? When you're the maybe only brown person, or like maybe there's you and one other brown person in the office, and they start speaking in Mandarin, you share that look, and I think every brown person knows what that look is, right? When you exchange it. So it's also moments like this where it binds all of us together.
Yeah, I think you're very right in saying that it's not really something that is, but it's something that is not, right? That results as the result of an alienation from what like the majority group is. So, I read your book, obviously. And I thought it was really interesting. It's not like any other sort of anthology or collection I've read before, right? Because there are short stories, there's like non-fiction, there's academic essays, from different, NTU professors, from, like graduate students, but there's also poetry, there's, stories from young children. So I guess when you set out putting together this anthology, what was it that you were really hoping to achieve with it?
I think, I think one thing was for sure when we discussed about making the book was that we didn't want it to just be, like academic pieces or essays, where people feel like they have to intellectualize this idea of like talking about race in Singapore, which I think has been going on for like quite a while. Which is why we had that mix of academic essays and poetry. So we wanted to give people that space to be able to express themselves in a way that they want to, and also I think in a sense, validate, I think, what we've been through as brown people in this country, and you don't feel like you have to be super articulate or like you use academic jargon to talk about race, essentially your emotions is valid, and I think that's what we also wanted to kind of achieve, and I think we could only have done that if we kind of had variety in terms of the mediums of submissions that we had.
It's like not having to argue for your existence or identity, but simply just expressing
yourself.
I think Hao Yang, what you said was exactly right, and actually my impulse, because sometimes I always get I'm always not very good with answering sort of like what do you want to achieve or like who your target audience is. I think those questions always don't necessarily factor into like at least how I create work. For me, at least, what is important is actually just the public expression, the public utterance, like that in and of itself is valuable. There doesn't necessarily need to be any sort of like thesis statement or like a solution to it, right? It is really just through the expressing and through the putting it out in the world that you get something and people can gain something from that also. Yeah.
And I mean, I thought it was quite effective in, sort of like speaking to the experiences that, I've had in Singapore. Obviously, like you said, there's no one way to be brown. There's no one thing that it means, and there's no such thing as a unified community. But, like reading through the essays and the stories and the poems, there were some experiences that I couldn't relate to, but there were some that I could. There were some things I read, I said, oh wow, that exact thing has happened to me, someone has said that to my face. And I guess like that's sort of the power of the personal anecdotes and the creative writing. But at the same time, we have academic essays that sort of help to formalize and validate the experiences that you've been having. Because I think at times it can be, and I think this is something that's been touched on in the book as well, when you have this idea of racial harmony being a very fragile construct, then every time you try and speak up against it, then it's sort of like perceived as being a threat to this very fragile racial harmony that we've been working so hard to keep intact. So, sometimes when you think about the experiences that you've had, or instances of racism or alienation that you faced, it can be easy to doubt yourself and think, oh, maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. So then when you actually read, like academic writing that says, this is all the data and the facts and logics to support that this is a problem, that can also be something that's very validating, So I think putting this like range of different mediums into one collection really made it very effective. So anyway, it's been a while since this book has come out. Since then, how do you think it's been received?
What are the people saying?
Yeah.
What have people said to you about
What are
it?
the masses saying?
We should have done a poll, no, I'm just kidding. I think the responses has been interesting. Of course, I think that from one book we couldn't have like invited everyone we wanted to, so we still feel that there are voices that are not there, but I think we've kind of like said from the start that it's not an encyclopedia, right? I think one of the most like interesting like response I've gotten was I gave a copy to my good friend who's Chinese Indonesian in Jakarta, and he shared on his Instagram that even though we're talking about brownness in relation to Singapore, these are universal themes that him as a minority in his country can relate. Yeah, right. So I think that was very like heartwarming to hear, and like when I caught up with him, like we had a very interesting like conversation about how he felt about the book. So I think that was something quite nice to hear. Yeah.
Kristian, nothing? Oh. Well, actually,
no one has come to you and said, hey, I read the book you edited, I really liked it, or I really hated it, or anything?
I mean, the only thing that I would say is, I think this is more like the formal element of the book in terms of like things like pacing and like kind of like whether or not it was like too long, or like whether or not like I think those things are things that I've heard a lot about. I mean, I think in general, I think people have been quite affirming of like the book, and if anything sort of like what it represents, right? Not necessarily like the content. That's not saying that the content isn't good, but like like I guess just sort of like the intention behind the book. But beyond that, I think I've been also interested in just hearing kind of like the more formal elements, right? At the end of the day, we are sort of like the editors, right? So I think hearing notes on like editing have also been interesting, and I've welcomed that for sure.
what Mysara said just now about her Chinese Indonesian friend resonating with the piece also resonated with me myself, because I mean, quite obviously I'm Chinese, so it's hard for me to relate to the brown experience, right? But then the pieces which I could still relate to, perhaps not in its entirety, I think I remember reading Nor's piece. Then there was this line that said, the fact that you exist shows that people have thought you're beautiful, and I think like many of your ancestors have like thought you were beautiful. And that just resonated with me a lot, because I also have parts of my identity which I don't think are, that cohere that well with the dominant Chinese straight man's identity, So there are also parts which I can still resonate with. And also I think there was another text, especially think national service, because I'm currently serving national service, right? And there was this text about how there's always this token Malay colonel, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. No one else in BMT there was that Malay colonel, and he's still there right now. So
It's true.
I'm like, yep, it is true.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that was the hope, right? I mean, I think the hope wasn't necessarily like, I mean, yeah, this goes into like target audience, but it wasn't necessarily like sort of like, oh, it's only meant for like brown people.
Yeah.
Or like, sure, obviously,
Yeah.
like, yes, that there is solidarity there that I think you just cannot necessarily sort of like really sort of define and articulate, but that like exists through this, and that we hope that people experience. But like you said, it is also right. I think the idea of being marginalized is something that happens for different kinds of identities also, right? It's not just about race. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Something else that's also quite surprising is you chose quite a lot of writing by young writers whom no one would have heard of. What was the intention behind that? Why not feature more established writers for, like, creative writing?
I mean, I would also say, like, are they not known outside the brown community? And that's the thing about, I guess, like, Singapore, since sometimes we tend to like focus, on the same group of people, and then we assume there's, no other people in the community who can do like great work as well, which is why we wanted to do an anthology, because we didn't want to fixate like this idea of talking about race to us and like some of the more senior writers that everyone knows, right? Yeah, so I think that would be my question back to you, like, why do we assume that these people are new when actually some of them have been in the art scene for quite a while, or literary scene for quite a while. So I think it's really to break this status quo that when we talk about race, we can only think about these few people.
Yeah, I think it was, I don't know if that's like the nature of like just like Singapore, but everyone sort of, not everyone knows everyone lah, but you always like have the few people in your head, right? And you think of like the thought leaders that
Go back to like the model minority.
Exactly. And I think we definitely wanted to resist that, but also I think we wanted to, especially with the younger writers, because we did do like the open call to try and get people who are like 17 and below. I think that was really just because, like Mysara said, we just wanted to ensure that like as many people as possible had the space to talk about it, because like these experiences are as real as the experiences that like your more established people have faced, right? If anything, it is maybe a bit more like, I don't know, like raw or pure, and if anything, that in and of itself, like I think has a message that like, I remember I personally, when I was reading some of these entries and just being like some of these people are like 13, 15-year-olds, right? And the way that they can so clearly understand like alienation and what it means to be brown, right? To be able to put that into words so clearly shows, I think, just a level of familiarity that is just so sad, right? That you have to be like 13 or 15 and already know this so intimately. I think in and of itself is, I think an interesting thing that we hope, or I hope that readers also reflect on.
Yeah, I think it's also to break away from this idea that you have to be established, or you have to have like a degree or master's degree to be able to talk about these things. And I think that rawness from these very young like writers also kind of help break that. Yeah.
What are your favorite pieces in the anthology, if you had to pick
I don't
one
play
or a
favorites,
couple?
no.
Maybe something that particularly stuck out to you.
I know our other editor likes Ashwin's piece. What's Ashwin's piece called?
Is
it? Ashwin, I think, was like a 10-year-old one.
When he ended with like...
in summary.
Like he still wants to be a minority.
Can be bad, but also can be good. Because
that's my favorite. I think I also say that's my favorite.
Sweet,
But I feel like that kinds of resonates with a lot of like brown people. We just don't say it out loud, like when you have moments where like, when it's Hari Raya or Deepavali, you see like, I like my culture, I wouldn't trade it to be like a majority, so I think that was one of my favorites, actually, because I feel like he says things that adults won't say, because even if you think you're radical, you're still politically correct, and he's just like, I'm just going to say it, I love that,
I know our other editor also like talks about just like, I mean, it's just going back to the idea of like purity, and so like it is really sort of like point counterpoint, like it's really like so also reflective of the kind of way we are conditioned to like think, which I think is just interesting. But it is so like it is like so innocent, I think. I don't know whether I really liked the interview with Ash the rapper. Ash is someone who lives in like the rental flat community, and I think that the idea of like carcerality, right, or being of prison, I think was very interesting. And I think just formally, just because it's an interview, I think it was quite different from the rest of the pieces. So at least for me, that felt like it's nice to like spice things up, I guess. Yeah.
I think it was okay. I won't say favorite, but like I'm really glad we had the pieces from the migrant workers as well, especially diary entries, because there are things that you won't hear or people don't bother to like seek out in that sense, right? And I thought it was very important that like we brought that in, especially with whatever has been going around for the past 2 years and even recently, I think that is very important, because also I think it breaks away from this idea that when we talk about race, it's Singaporeans only, right? I think we needed that, because I think that is a piece that even brown Singaporeans need to kind of like reflect on themselves. And I travel to Indonesia quite a bit, and in certain parts, like let's say Yogyakarta, when you land, like once you reach the airport, there'll be this counter, and that counter is specifically for migrant workers, domestic helpers, right? And it's basically if you come back and you've been abused, you can go straight there, right? And because they just like kind of shifted the airport, so that was the first time I saw it like this year since COVID, and I was like, wow. And I spoke to the lady there, and she was telling me, because they have no other outlets, right? And that was why they needed that. And of course, we have like quite a number of like domestic helpers here in Singapore, a lot of like unspoken cases. So, those pieces were like very important, I think.
So what surprised you the most about the works that you received for the open call? Or what surprised you the least?
I think like what I said, I think what surprised me the least and the most, right, is that just like how sad the stories were, I guess. A lot of them were really like, oh my god. Really breaks my heart, I guess. like 13, 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds or so, to be able to write so intimately about this thing, right? It's just so like, man, what are we doing? I think, at least for me. But also just like, these people are damn good writers, man. I was really like, I was also just having like an existential moment, like what was I doing when I was 15? Really, honestly.
I think for me also is how many people would want to get their voices heard, because I think we had to reject some of the open call pieces because they were above the like age limit also, right? But the stories are of course like important and valid. And I think even though we can say, a lot of people are talking on it on social media and stuff, there's never really been a lot of platforms for minority people to just like write down their experiences or express it in the way that they want. You can say that, like you can just do it, you can just create art, but it's not really that easy.
I think definitely like along the lines, which is not necessarily related to the open call, but like just this idea of how do you like edit pieces that are so like visceral? How do you edit like I guess like literally someone's lived experience, right? Still sort of trying to hold on to your editor head of being like thinking of like, I don't know, like what is like dramatic, or sort of thinking about where it fits in the whole like anthology, and so then thinking about like the kind of purpose it has to serve, which all seem like such like logistical and like utilitarian things to think about. And then when you put that like, and when you have to think about it, when you are confronted with, I guess, these very visceral experiences, it's also like, I think that at least for me, I think it was interesting sort of negotiating that, I think.
I think Mysara alluded just now to how it was important for these minority voices to be able to be featured on a page, right? It's essentially